From KVUE News in Austin, you're watching Texas This Week with Ashley Goudeau.
Good Sunday morning. Lawmakers on both the federal and state level are reacting to the mass shooting at an elementary school in Uvalde with hearings, committees, and directives. Let's get to the three things you need to know in Texas politics. In a primetime address Thursday night, President Joe Biden made an emotional plea for action in the wake of three mass shootings that left a total of 35 people dead, including the Robb Elementary School shooting in Texas, where 19 students and 2 teachers were murdered. The president calling on Congress to pass red flag and safe storage laws, strengthen background checks, ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, and if not that, raise the age to buy them from 18 to 21. A bipartisan group of U.S. senators, including Senator John Cornyn from Texas, is working on potential legislation. Meanwhile, a House committee has already voted out many of the reforms the president wants, sending them to the full House for a vote this coming week. Here in Texas, Governor Greg Abbott is issuing directives to try to prevent violence in schools, sending letters to the Texas Education Agency and Texas School Safety Center to inspect schools and find ways to maximize school safety. He also asked Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick and Speaker of the House Dade Phelan to appoint special committees to find legislative solutions. Those committees were formed days after the governor asked. Governor Abbott's Democratic challenger, former Congressman Beto O'Rourke, says he has a plan to protect Texas children. He held a town hall in Austin Friday saying in order to reduce gun violence, the state has to do something about guns, proposing universal background checks, red flag laws, safe storage laws, and other laws that he describes as common ground among Texans. State lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are urging Governor Greg Abbott to call a special session to pass legislation aimed at preventing another mass shooting and protecting schools. But political analysts say that is unlikely to happen. Harvey Kronberg, publisher and founder of the Quorum Report, joined me to talk about why that is. I want you to start by sharing some thoughts with us on Governor Abbott's response to the mass shooting in Uvalde.
Initially, I thought it was simply formulaic. That is, I dubbed these events the Thoughts and Prayers Tour. You essentially have state officials lined up at a table with the appropriate seals on their windbreakers indicating they're important people, and they go and they offer words of consolation and promises of future action. In this particular case, obviously, the Thoughts and Prayer Tour was interrupted by Democratic challenger Beto O'Rourke, who threw them totally off script and began the downward descent of press coverage for Governor Abbott.
You know, he is now calling on the lieutenant governor and the Speaker of the House to appoint special committees to study several topics from school safety to gun safety. Meanwhile, you have lawmakers on both sides of the aisle who want him to call a special session. Talk to us about first the committees that he's calling to be created.
Frankly, it's a delay tactic because every day that's delayed makes it less and less likely we'll have a special session. The kinds of issues and actions that need to be taken are not something that can be done by executive order, which typically has only limited authority. And so this is essentially show business, not to be too derogatory, but we've had our studies, we've had commissions. After the Santa Fe shooting, he had a very comprehensive roundtable. What's notable about this particular directive to the legislative leadership is that it's absence of any kind of restrictions on guns, only the subject of gun safety. I'm not sure how satisfactory that's going to be to the folks back in Uvalde or the public at large. I think that the governor is in a situation of his own making here. He called a special session earlier this year, late last year, and included things like constitutional carry. Most of his history has been to prevent anybody from getting to the right of him on guns. He's always been more afraid of primary challengers than he has been of general election challengers. And right now, if he's looking at his calendar, he knows that the election is in November. That means early voting starts in September. The state Republican convention is in 3 weeks. Again, these are the most inflamed and engaged voters out there. And there's a current betting line right now as to whether or not he's even going to personally appear, having been booed in Uvalde, having been interrupted by both Beto O'Rourke and State Senator Roland Gutierrez at previous public appearances. And I think he's going to be very public appearance shy.
So let's talk about the special session, because to be frank, it's June and we have an election in November. Special sessions, of course, only 30 days with a legislature who we might want to point out is probably not excited about the possibility of coming back after the several special sessions they previously had. Is a special session, in your opinion, truly something on the table for the governor?
Absolutely not. The time frame doesn't work for the governor. If the governor calls a special session, he essentially has to put a plan on the table. It's okay to put a plan on the table, fight for it, and lose, but you've got to at least have a plan on the table. There's no consensus. There's only, on the Republican side, there's fear of the NRA. On the Democratic side, frankly, I'm not sure they want to have many votes on guns, but it gives them a position to posture. And the mechanics of a special session are such that he calls the special session, a bill has to be submitted, the speaker and the lieutenant governor then have to refer it to committee where there are hearings, and then there's mechanical delays that the legislature can override. But the reality is that there's going to be about 2 weeks in a special session, even if they knew where they were going, where you have a bunch of people standing around doing nothing, and national cameras would be focused on it, and any inactivity or failure would simply be more of a platform for both Democrats and Republicans to posture.
One of the things that I think is interesting that you just said is that you don't think Democrats want to have a vote on guns right now either. Why is that?
Well, generally speaking, we're going into a redistricting cycle, and so the Democrats, the districts were drawn to be either Democratic or Republican. The primaries are now over, but any vote that you cast on guns may not have consequence in this election, which is going to probably be a low turnout election because it's a mid-year election. It's not, a mid-cycle election. There's no presidential candidate at the top of the ticket. But going on the record to vote on automatic weapons or any kind of weapons, frankly, in a district that you still don't largely know is perilous. And they're not going to be really thinking about the 2022 election. That's pretty much already in the can as far as the legislature is concerned. It'll be the 2024 election where there is going to be a presidential candidate. And if history is any guide, there'll be dramatically higher turnout. People that don't usually show up for primaries, that do show up in November. And the bottom line is that I do believe there are any number of Democrats committed to some type of gun control, but they don't want to cast a vote that's simply going to put them on record and get nowhere.
You know, sadly, this latest shooting is just the latest in a list of mass shootings that we've had here in the state of Texas. Do you think there is an appetite amongst the legislature, not amongst the people, because I think we see time after time after time and poll after poll how the people feel. Is there an appetite in the legislature to do something this time, you think?
Well, do something is kind of a broad-based term, and yes, there is a huge appetite to do something. There's proposals to harden the schools, to establish more guards at the schools, but the gun violence is not just occurring in schools; it occurred in churches, and I don't know how much you can harden the world we live in, frankly. The appetite that the legislature has is to do something meaningful, but let's remember that in Texas, as it's currently constituted, as far as the legislature is concerned, the only election that matters is the primary. That'll happen in March 2 years from now. And that primary we're a state of over 30 million people right now. Republicans will continue to have the majority, and there's probably 1.5 million people that vote in their primary. They're the most motivated and the most inflamed, just as they are on the Democratic side. And they're not particularly representative of the state. but they're the ones who control the future and destiny of the lawmakers.
And now, the last word. This week, we heard from Harvey Kronberg of the Quorum Report, who, in his own right, is an expert on Texas politics. And in the midst of all these calls for action coming from people across the state and, frankly, across the country, he pointed out a reality. The most motivated, most inflamed voters control the future of our state, not the majority, not the people. Year after year, Sunday after Sunday, I stand here on your TV or screen and say words that I hope will inspire you to get out and vote. And year after year, election after election, Texans don't vote. Political maps are drawn to favor the party in power, so primaries matter. Some would argue more so than the general election in Texas. In the March primary, about 17.7% of the 17.2 million registered voters in Texas cast ballots. 82% of people who are registered to vote didn't. 82%. Even fewer voters turned out for the May runoff. So when lawmakers are creating and passing policy, they are trying to please that 17%. What's in the best interest of all Texans is probably not the priority. They have to keep the base happy. The voters who are on fire for their party, going to the conventions and turning out for every election. The minority. That's who laws are passed for. And until the majority of Texans get to the polls to cast ballots, politicians are just going to keep pleasing the people that keep them in power. That's the last word. And this has been Texas This Week.